Oh. Wrong notebook. So this is our Christmas Sunday, and it's so nice to be together. Our Christmas season seems like it came very fast this year. Year is almost over, but we have some nice celebrating to do before it is. Gail Boss wrote a fantastic book titled All Creation Waits, The Advent Mystery of New Beginnings. It's an Advent devotional book. It's wonderful. Each chapter describes a way that an animal adapts to winter with the loss of heat and light. And one chapter talks about the firefly. The common eastern firefly dies off every year, but in a sense, their little lights never cease. Because a firefly egg, which is buried deep in the ground, gives off a faint glow. And after only 2 weeks, it will hatch, and this little red larva will radiate again with this soft, constant glow. So far beneath our feet, they have spent the winter months crawling through the soil, eating and growing. And the book says, when it senses that it has grown fully, the larva will construct a sort of mud cave for itself in the soil. And it will lie in this cave, glowing and still, while every part of its body melts and is remade. And it will have crawled through the dark earth for more than 300 days to be made ready for this little transformation that happens in less than 2 weeks. And so this new creature, nothing like a worm that it started out, will push out of its cave, dig and break above the ground. It'll rest a moment and breathe. And then it'll rise on fresh wings, its light long hidden, released then to dance through the dark nights of summer. This quiet and persistent light of the firefly, I think, is something like this peaceful joy that we're celebrating today. We celebrate God's light and love, soft and persistent, radiating love to all the earth. And we celebrate God's peace, and we anticipate how it might be manifest in the world. It might be hard to believe that God would come to this world, right, to be with us. Harder still to believe that God would come to us as a little baby. And so no wonder then that an angel visits Joseph in his dreams to show Joseph how the Messiah would be born into the world. And of course, he has to tell Joseph, don't be afraid. But there's a lot to be afraid of. This 9 months of pregnancy, especially in those days, allows plenty of opportunity for feelings of fear and anxiety to take place in hopeful parents. I remember when I was pregnant with my first son, Ian, and I was so excited about that pregnancy. And I had all the normal symptoms, morning sickness and sore back and swollen feet. And even those things were just kind of beautiful to me because they just meant that things were going the way they should. But on the night of our first childbirth class, the reality of the time between being pregnant and holding our baby set in. It was not going to be pleasant, and I was having second thoughts about the whole thing. There is only one way for that beautiful life to move from the inside of me to the big outside world, and I was not at all interested in participating in that process. I left that class with great fear and anxiety. But it's funny because after I had time to breathe and take it all in, I realized that this birthing, was just another piece of this beautiful thing that was taking place in my body and in our marriage. And it was going to produce a child, of all things, this miracle of life and love. And so I developed a sense of peace. It didn't come suddenly, but it certainly helped to prepare me for what was next. In this time of transition that we go through, a time of gestation, God seems to send a messenger of peace. If you have lost a loved one, as many of us have in one way or another, we go into grief. And at first it's very startling and harsh and hard, and we can't breathe, and we don't know how we're going to get through it. But then something happens, and somehow we begin to move forward, and it takes time, and the grief doesn't go away, but somehow we begin to form a new normal. And that time between the harsh grief and the new normal, I believe, is this time of peace that God offers us, a peace that's deep and wide and nudging its way through our lives, and occasionally even bursting forth in radiant light. Peaceful joy brings balance to what feels out of sorts in the world. And in a world that's often so scary, peaceful joy can speak words of comfort from within us, from above us, from one another. We share those words of comfort. In a world that values strength and fortitude, peaceful joy portrays vulnerability. In a world of kings and rulers fighting for power, peaceful joy is born in the form of a warm and floppy baby. We grow impatient sometimes, waiting for the bursting forth of radiant light. We want those powerful assurances. We talked about that last week a bit, but we want these out of the ordinary lightning bolts to remind us, right, and wake us from our sleep and send us barreling into the day full of hope and vigor for life. But it just doesn't always happen that way. God's peace is that warm, persistent glow, that peaceful presence, those steady footsteps, that outreached arm of Jesus, always ready to pull us out of the stormy waters. We may not notice because the glow is so soft and steady, but that soft and steady and ongoing glow of light is our blessed assurance of the powerful presence of God. Peace, yes, is the absence of war and confusion and oppression and all the hard things of life, and I believe that someday a day will come when all of that will stop and we'll be able to live in a constant state of contentment and deep joy. But meanwhile, God offers us these moments of peace in the midst of chaos, and peace of mind in the midst of fear, and inner calm in the midst of tragedy. Something gets us through. We may have a complete breakdown when it's all over, but we will have made it to the other side when we needed most that constant glow of God's presence. And sometimes we need it to glow a little brighter or burn a little hotter or something. But when we need it, it seems to be there. Or maybe when we need it most is when we notice it most. I've told you the story, but I was a very fearful child. I was a product of the very public upheaval and assassinations in the 60s. And I was taking in as a young child all this violence and the protests and the unhappiness, the shootings of Reverend Dr. King and President Kennedy and his brother Bobby. All those things weighed so heavy on my young heart, and I became afraid that someone would harm my family or me. And so I just wanted to know where my family was all the time. I didn't want to be away from them. I was scared a lot as a kid, and the weight of that fear and worry was almost more than I could bear at times. As I got older, that fear didn't really leave, and although I went ahead and lived my life, I always had an upset stomach, and I had panic attacks, and I never shared any of that with my family. And I'm sure they wondered why I was so weird about everything, but it was my own little silent hell for many years. And then one day when I was in high school and about to leave for the day, and again dealing with a bad stomach and sort of this deep exhaustion that goes with being neurotic, it occurred to me that I needed to pray about it. And in the same way that I had never spoken to anyone else about it, I had never spoken to God. And that was weird because I prayed all the time. But it shows how deeply I buried all of this inside of me. But that morning I stopped and I prayed and I told God how tired I was of living in fear, and if he could just help me out, I would love to be released from the grip of it. And very suddenly I was just washed over with warmth and peace, and I went to school that day for the first time since I was 8 years old. Calm. My stomach was settled, my mind was clear, and I never again, even to this day, felt that kind of fear again, as long as nobody gets me on an elevator. That one didn't go away. I don't know why. There was something left off the list. I don't do elevators. But anyway, all this is to say, don't forget to pray when you're experiencing something that feels too heavy for you to handle. Don't bury it. Talk to God. Talk to your family. Talk to us. You know, we are your friends. If we can't talk to each other, what's the point of all this? You're invited, and I hope you understand this. You're invited to bring your whole self when you come to this church. Amen. You don't need to clean yourself up for us. You come as you are. You bring your baggage, and we will help you hold it. God's peace is available to all of us, right? It's right here, glowing softly. And if you're missing it, let us help you find it. Church is not about good people. It's about real people. People who have fears and doubts and illness and craziness. God didn't send Jesus to the well people and the neatly packed people, but to the rest of us. In all our chaos and fear and illness and tragedies, we're the ones that Jesus is holding his hand out to, right? In the midst of choppy waters. So grab hold. And then we'll get back in the boat together, right? Where the warm glow of God's peace can wash over us. I wrote a poem when I was struggling with getting through one of my hard days, and I want to close with this poem this morning. It's called Reach. Try as I might to maintain a steady gait, I walk like a drunk through life, cloudy and crooked, on a path laid straight before me. From halls of love and laughter, fears and tears, I emerge alone and quiet, not sad so much as wondering how I found myself here. God called me, I say, and I believe that happened as it happens to all at some point. God called me, and I said okay, not knowing what was ahead. Like Peter stepping out of a rocky boat onto the stormy water, I thought I could. I still think if this damn water would hold still for just a moment, I might make it all the way to Jesus. But meanwhile, I reach for the outstretched hand. Amen.